Hello everybody, it's AJ back again for another monster video. Welcome, how's it going? How's your week going? Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about the Manticore, and it derives from an ancient Persian word for man-eater. So that's basically the Manticore's job, is to eat humans. It's one of the few monsters in the game which specifically targets humans, interestingly enough. That makes it an interesting monster for a game where there's more than one dominant humanoid species around, that it specifically targets humanoids, and specifically humans amongst all the other humanoids. And you may ask, why? Why does it do that? Well, there's actually a really good reason. It's a biological reason, believe it or not, and I'll cover that in the course of this video as we talk about this fascinating creature. Now, it is a large monstrosity. The source of this creature, the original origin of this creature, is a bit vague. I can't really find a lot of concrete canon information. What I can tell you, though, is it's been around from the very beginning of Dungeons & Dragons, way back in the 1970s, and has been in every single edition of the game since the start. It is not generally found in uninhabited areas, because it likes to stay pretty close to human settlements, usually within... it's got typically a dismal lair, dismal being a dark and foul place that other creatures don't like to dwell. But it's rare that you'll find this creature in its lair, unless you go specifically looking for it if you're hunting manticores, and there's probably good reasons why you would go hunting manticores. But usually they're encountered outside the lair while they're hunting for humans. And their lair will be within 20 miles, or 3 hours leisurely flight time for a manticore, from a human settlement or a trade route. Luckily, there's very good information on the manticore from a Dragon magazine article from January 1990, I believe. Yeah, it's a really good issue, this magazine. The manticore's sensory organs are pretty good. They're better in vision. It's more similar to a hawk than a human, and their sense of smell at close range is much sharper than a human's, but probably not approaching that of a dog, because they just don't have the sort of face volume. They're typically depicted as you see them in the monster manual for 5th edition, they've got a very human-like face, which means although they have a very powerful bite, they typically don't employ it full force. Although they're capable of biting through plate steel, they typically don't use their bite to full force in combat, because the nature of the head means that they'd have to turn the head to actually chomp down on the torso of a human. So what they do is they'll attack with their spines and their claws, primarily in combat. So although it's got 3 attacks, 1 with its bite and 2 with its claws, or 3 with its tail spikes, the way that it actually employed all of those is a little bit different from what you would get from just the stats here. So I'll cover its combat techniques. The healthy manticore, it's gone originally from having 12 darts in its spiny tail to having 24. So they've actually doubled in number from when this article in Dragon magazine was printed, which is interesting. And it fires them in volleys of a few at a time, and these grow back fairly rapidly. And although it's not really alluded to, they are made out of iron, a steel-like substance that it organically secretes, and it actually requires a diet of flesh and metal. And the reason why the manticore hunts humans so often is because humans are the most likely humanoid to be wandering around bedecked in metal. Dwarves typically will not travel over land overly much. They're not a reliable source of high metal food, because they'll be hard to get at, and they typically travel around in squads that are very heavily armed. So it's very dangerous for a manticore to attack dwarves. But humans use tools, and they walk around in chainmail. They're relatively easy pickings for a manticore that is attacking on the outskirts of settlements and things, where humans generally armor up to protect themselves against brigands and the occasional attack of wild animals. A manticore finds them a perfect food source. They've got everything that a manticore needs right there. So, in combat, the manticore will generally avoid attacking humanoids like magic users and such who don't have metal armor on. they'll go for the armoured, metal-clad and metal-wielding warrior or fighter first and try to kill him as the best source of food. Even if they can't kill everybody in the party due to injury to themselves, they'll grab the body of the fighter that they've just downed first and make off with them and eat them at their leisure later on, or take it back to their lair to feed to their cubs. Their reproduction is pretty interesting. They have a society very much like a lion pack or a limited sort of number pride, and they're as dangerous as lions because they can actually bunch up in groups of up to 4 individuals that are hunting at one time. Typically, though, you'll find either a female that is out hunting for her cubs, a unmated male or female that are out prowling around, a mated pair who are also hunting, or maybe even a group of juveniles who have banded together to hunt humans in a group of 4 or 5. So they can be fairly dangerous as they increase in number. They've got a challenge rating of 3. Their armor class is 14, natural armor, and they have a very rich, supple leather, which is coveted by people who make furniture and fine leather apparel. And not to forget that they have these large dragon-like wings, which are a rich source of high-quality leather as well. Their hit points are 68. They've got a speed of 30 feet on the ground and 50 feet in the air. They can only attain flying once they're fully mature adults, which they achieve after about 4 years of growth. Up to 3 years, they're a juvenile, and up until about 3 years of age, from birth, they can glide, but they can't actually fly under their own power. They'll typically jump off high ledges and things like that to glide down and take out targets. And before the age of about 2 years, they are largely dependent on their mother for any sort of food and things as they attain full growth. And it takes them a while to generate their metal hard teeth, claws, and tail spines, because they need to eat metal in order to metabolize and secrete that into their claws and fangs. They have multiple rows of shark-like teeth that have, as I say, a high metal content, so they can actually punk straight through armor and tear armor apart. So the lair of a manticore will have bits and pieces of metal strewn around, but it actually eats armor and weapons and things, including magical items. And the magical items will lose all sort of enchantment as they get digested and secreted out into the claws and fangs and things. Although the claws and fangs and spines are a high source of very, very good quality steel, which is coveted by people who make magical items, because that can be crafted easily into masterwork metal implements. So they've got dark vision out to 60 feet, passive perception of 11, strength of 17, dex of 16, con of 17, intelligence of 7, wisdom of 12, and charisma of 8. They can speak common, but they've got fairly high-pitched sort of voice, which is a combination of a man and a lion's higher-pitch falsetto sort of a voice, and their language is fairly simple and direct and growly and angry, as you'd imagine. So they have a sort of a lingo of their own, and it's hard to interpret what they're saying, but generally speaking, they'll be insulting you and denigrating you in combat to best effect. They use their intelligence like a weapon, and they're not there to negotiate with humans, they're there to eat them. They will work with other evil predators if it suits them, but they are animals, and they are largely concerned about their own drives and motives, their instincts to mate, to breed, to dominate territory, and to provide food for themselves and their young. And they need a high amount of metal, so they are attracted to places where combat is rich, where humans are metalled up, or where there's metal lying around in battlefields and things like that. They're not one to, so they are on the outskirts of civilization all the time. They don't go into uncharted areas. They don't go and dig up ore for themselves. They need to actually predate on others who produce metal. So humans and other humanoids who create metal armor and implements and things are very important to the Manticores. If they went away, the Manticores would find it very hard to survive. The tail spikes regrow. They regrow at a rate of... Well, they say that they regrow when the Manticore finishes a long rest. That's simplistic. they actually require time to regrow. Over a 24-hour period, they can regenerate those 24 tail spikes because they've got lots and lots of them in reserve, growing like shark's teeth, constantly pushing up from behind. And of course, you may actually encounter Manticores who have used up all their tail spikes recently, but typically they'll keep a few in reserve so they're not unarmed with this spike attack at any time. Because not only is it necessary for their own defense, it's necessary for their dominance amongst other Manticores as well. Because those spines, they're not immune to their own spines, of course, and Manticores could quite easily use them against each other. The tail spikes have a range of 100 to 200 feet, plus 5 to hit, and do 7 points of piercing damage. The bite does 7 points of piercing damage as well, and the claws do 6 points of slashing damage. So typically, as effective as a longsword, all of their attacks. And with 3 attacks per round, that can be quite devastating, particularly if there's multiple Manticores coming up against you with their plus 5 to hit. They generally produce litters of 1 to 3. They take 5 months to gestate after their mating season in autumn, and the young are helpless when they are born, and they are fed pieces of meat and ferrous metals that are torn up into manageable sizes by their mother. The male typically abandons the mother after the mating period, and she raises them by herself. And yeah, that's pretty much their biology for you. Unlike other monsters that can be broken and trained from birth, Manticores are highly resistant to that, unless you employ magical charm on them, or typically you are an evil humanoid who is interested in killing humans, and that just basically fits in with the Manticore's natural instincts. So you can find them amongst orcs and goblinoid communities, evil warlords, things like that, and they may be in service to other monstrous creatures as well, hill giants, that sort of thing. And yeah, they make an interesting threat to your wild nature environment. It's really good to introduce a Manticore fairly early on in a game when they start to venture out into the wilderness. Manticores can be found closer in to human settlements, as I mentioned, but they'll avoid territory which is dominated by heavy groups of griffins or chimeras, puritans, wyverns, and most definitely avoid dragons. Dragons will kill Manticores on sight, typically. So, yeah, they're a close-in threat, one that you're most likely to encounter when you start venturing out into the wilderness. And if you go into the real gritty, dire terrain, the dismal places, that's where the Manticores like to make their lairs. Swamps and grottos and cliff faces and haunts and ruins are very suitable to their palate, their aesthetic. So yeah, that's Manticores for you. I'll have another video coming up this weekend. Thanks for listening, everybody.